I'm your host, Sarah Baus, and welcome to Attainable Podcast. Hi guys, welcome back to the Attainable Podcast if you've been here before, and welcome if you haven't been here before. My name is Sarah Baus. I'm your host. I am 24. I'm from Charleston. I'm a social media manager. I own my own business, and I used to be a chemist. So that's kind of the curveball with me. If you've been here, you know my story, you know all that stuff, but I'm super glad that you're all here. I'm super glad to be here. Honestly, it's been a minute since we've had a solo episode, which is fun. Here's the reason why, guys. One, I recorded with a ton of really cool guests, which I hope you enjoyed. Hannah, Natalie, Kayla, like some really, really cool guests, which I loved. Also, I have been battling, I hope you can't hear my voice, like some sinus thing. Maybe now that I pointed it out, you notice it now it's going to annoy you the whole time. I really hope not, but I have been battling like this sinus thing. And I was really hoping that I wanted to record a solo episode sooner, but I sounded horrible. And now I've sort of ran out of guest episodes, to be honest, and I need to record. And I've been wanting to record, so I'm happy to be here. Really hoping that the sound isn't bad, although I know, even though you won't notice, I know I'll have to take breaks to like cough or something. So we're all happy here. Just disclaimer, because I feel like in this day and age, you have to say it. I don't have COVID. I did take a rapid at-home COVID test and it did come back negative. Woo! So good with that. If you are on Spotify, do not forget that we do have our video up on Spotify. So you can actually watch the podcast, watch me, my natural element. This is my office. Take a look at this wall. It is in fact like a blue, not a black. I get asked if that's black all the time. It is like a dark blue. And then you can see over here, this is actually the other wall. I'm thinking of painting it all white though, literally redoing my office, even though I literally just did it. Anyway, today, let's get on with the podcast. Today, we're talking about how to make big decisions. And these are those big decisions that like make that feeling in your stomach, that like curdling, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, it feels horrible. You know what I mean? A lot of times that feeling is worse than the decision itself. But over the past couple weeks, I've been talking to a friend about making a big decision, and I've reflected over the big decisions that I've had to make, most of them over the last like 2 or 3 years. So I'd love it if life stopped throwing me curveballs, but whatever. And I've gotten to think about, I have some rules that I have now for big decisions. I have some tips and like tricks that I use when I need to make a big decision, because big decisions don't necessarily, they get a little bit easier, but I'm always surprised about how hard they are every time they come around. Like I look back and I'm like, wow, we've been at an impasse before and still my stomach feels like it's going to drop out of my butt. So first I want to go over like some of the big decisions that I've had to make over the past couple of years that have sort of led me to my like big decision non-negotiables. The first like large decision that I can really remember was actually me picking a college. And when I was choosing a college, I was like dead set sending my deposit in to CU Boulder, which is University of Colorado, Boulder. My dad went there and I just thought it was the coolest. I was getting away from South Carolina. It was going to be great. I had no idea what I was going to do there, but it was like a brand new scene. And I was dead set, like I was going to CU Boulder. Of course, as somebody who lives in South Carolina, I would have to pay out of state tuition, which, in a dream world, like when you're just thinking about colleges, you don't really think about the impact of tuition. You're like, it's just what you do. It's you pay it, you get over it, whatever. Well, then I had sent my application to like several places, of course. I've gotten some scholarships, just a couple things, but nothing enough to entice me away from CU Boulder until I got a letter from Columbia College. And I had applied for Columbia College because we were hosted by them for this scholarship program that I did like separately. And I did not think I was going to go there. Full transparency. So Columbia College at the time was a all women's college. It just went co-ed like a couple years ago, maybe 1 to 2 years after I left. I think 2 years after I left, but like all women's. I did not think I was going to an all women's liberal arts college. Like I was thinking I was going to go to some big school with a ton of people, and that just like wasn't in the plan. And so when I got a letter from Columbia College, it was both so exciting and devastating because I was super privileged and I'm super grateful. I got a full scholarship to go to Columbia College. And you guys know the end of the story if you know me. But me being 17 and dramatic, I looked at the two letters, see you Boulder, ready to send my deposit in. It was going to put me in about $500,000 in debt. And then looking at Columbia College, and it was zero debt, and I was bawling. Now, granted, I bawled for maybe 1 to 2 days. It felt like an eternity to my little soul, but it was not. It was definitely not very long. But I was looking at the two, and again, in my dramatic 17-year-old head, I was like, am I going to follow my dream or am I going to follow the money? Guys, I followed the money. It actually turned out great. But how I made that decision, and the first time I remember I asked my mom, I was like, Mom, you what do I do? You got to help me. And this is something that I absolutely adore about my mom, but I know it's frustrating in the moment, but I've really appreciated the times that she's done this. When there's a decision like this, that's all me, she abandoned ship. Okay. She was like, honey, I can't make the decision for you. That's all you. I will have no part in this. And I'm like, what the hell? Are you kidding? And so as a high schooler, I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm a child. How am I supposed to make this decision? She was like, no, this is all you, which really I was frustrated with at the time, but I really have grown to appreciate now. And so I looked at these and I was like, what the hell am I going to do? And truly in my heart, it was a battle between following my dream or following the money. Well, then I went to go check the mail, and 2 days after that, I'd first gotten that letter from Columbia College, and I was looking through it, hoping to find something for me, which there never was, except for these college things. But I always looked, because you always do. And I flipped through, and it was my mom's student loan letter, and then it was my dad's student loan letter. And I just looked at it and I was like, I don't want to be sending my child off to college, still paying for my own. Now granted, my mom went to college very late, and not very late, but later than, the average student. And my dad got several degrees. So, that's probably not a all the time occurrence, but I just looked at that and I realized the weight of debt and student loans. And I was like, I can't do it. So cried some more, felt like I was giving up everything, went to Columbia College, and I was super excited about it. After I got over my drama, took about a week. And it was the best decision I ever did. And I do not regret it. I would go back to Columbia College in a heartbeat. I absolutely love that school. And that was the first time that I really had to make a decision. And then, of course, 4 years later, I'm seeing how that pans out. And it's important to reflect on these moments to remind yourself, hey, you can make big decisions. It does work out for the better. And even if things get messed up, you can turn it around. The next large decision that I made was, 4 years later, when I decided to leave my job at the pharmaceutical company. For those of you who are new here, don't know my story, everybody else is going to be like, groan, we've heard this before. Listen, I know. But just some context, I had a chemistry degree. I'm a very creative person. As you can tell, I'm a social media manager and I have a podcast. So chemistry really wasn't the lane that I was supposed to be in, but I didn't listen to my gut. And I took a job as a research and development chemist at a pharmaceutical company. I lasted 6 months. My mental health went down the drain. And then I left with no plan, no money, and no job, and moved back home in order to figure out my life. And now we're here. Very quick synopsis. But that was a huge decision. And it was looking basically at this path that I had been following for about a decade, if we're counting high school and all the medical classes I took and all the years that I was doing STEM. And now all of a sudden I was completely forsaking STEM and going into a world that I had no idea what to do. And really, I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know what I was going to be doing. So, and now I look back, and that was probably a decision where it took the longest to like turn around. When I've spoken about it a little bit, like, but when I left that job and I moved back home, it wasn't like, oh, great, like I'm away from that toxic environment. It's awesome. I can just like hang out at home. I'll get no. It took a long time for me to find myself again, for me to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. And I mean, it was over a year of me just recovering from that identity crisis. And so that was the first big decision where I didn't really get to see the positive of that until a long time after that. Like, it was months of me still wondering if I had made the right decision. It was months of me really having to battle with my pride. I was so embarrassed because people would ask, like, I was hoping that people wouldn't ask. Wasn't on social media because I didn't want to tell people, yeah, I like had this really cool career and now I'm working at TJ Maxx, which is what I did in between me opening my business and then and quitting my job at the pharmaceutical company. And so that's probably the decision that I can reflect on the most and like, wow, that was a really dark place. And it led to the best, brightest, hardest, but most rewarding time in my life thus far. My third like large decision was when I decided to leave TJ Maxx and start working for myself. I remember like how it kind of happened. I started freelancing a little bit, and when COVID hit and TJ Maxx, when we all got furloughed, I had some extra time to spend on the business and spend some time freelancing. So I took on some more work during those, I can't remember, it was like 4 to 6 weeks, something. We were off for like a hot minute. I took some extra work, and by the time TJ Maxx called me back, I was making more money than I was at TJ Maxx. And I always preface, like, it sounds very impressive. It's TJ Maxx. It was like a lower job. Like, it's not that hard, but still, I was still making more money. And I remember like I called my best friend, Lauren, and I was bawling my eyes out because I was like, I don't want to be a quitter. I don't want to quit another job. At this point, I had quit my job at the pharmaceutical company in October, and now it was March. Like, there was not a lot of time. And so I was like, I'm thinking, how is this going to look on my resume? It's going to, I'm going to look flighty. I don't want to be flighty. I already felt flighty because, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and everybody's asking me what I want to do, and I don't know what I want to do. And so I was just crying because I was like, I don't know what to do. Do I pursue my own business, or do I stay in the security of TJ Maxx? They want to move me to manager. I have these people counting on me. And she looked at me and she was like, Sarah, why are you crying? Like, you've been talking about doing something for yourself, like working for yourself, doing something creative for years. Like, I had been reading books on creativity and running your own business my sophomore year of college. She was like, you've been talking about this for forever, and now this opportunity is being presented to you and you're crying? Like, there's not a question here. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So from there, I sort of wiped my tears and I was like, okay, cool. Like, this is what we're going to do. And that was the first time that I kind of stepped off the edge and I said, okay, now I am the provider of my income, in the fact that, like, if I don't get like work, if I don't get clients, like, I don't get paid. And that's been a whole journey in itself. But those are like the three like largest decisions I can recall that have been that caused me to have these rules that I take into the smaller decisions and any decisions I will make from here on out. So I've got 3 non-negotiables on making big decisions. And these are these 3 non-negotiables. Let's discuss. Number 1, we don't rush big decisions. Big decisions should not be made in haste. And notice I said we don't rush big decisions. Sometimes decisions do need to be made at a fast pace. That's not rushing, that's just the timeline. But if you don't have a strict timeline that's forcing you to move faster, there's no reason why you should like hastily like make a decision. You may want to get that curdling feeling out of your stomach, but by rushing a decision, you risk not looking at all the elements in front of you and making not necessarily the wrong one, but a choice that you probably would have reconsidered if you had enough time. You know what I mean? So that's the first one. We don't rush big decisions. The second one, we don't make decisions from a place of confusion or anxiety. This is a huge one. This is a huge one for me. I'm sure it's a huge one for you. When we're first faced with these decisions or with conflict, a lot of times that we need to take a second. You know what I mean? We need to take a second to really evaluate the environment around us. We need to take a second to really evaluate like what's being asked of us, what are the consequences of each choice, all those type of things. And a lot of times when not even just the big decisions, but small decisions, I will be like, my first reaction will come from a place of anxiety, and that will then cause confusion. And I can identify that my mind is like tumbling over and over and just rolling down this hill. That's not helpful. That's not helpful to anybody. And I have made decisions from that place, and it is not fun. And I don't appreciate when I do that. Future me does not thank past me when she makes decisions out of anxiety. It's always just, it's not helpful. You have to get yourself to a place of reason and to at least like slight mental calm before you make these decisions. For me, what's been super helpful and what I try to do is I get the problem and I separate it from myself. I think about it like physically putting it down on the table. And almost like, you know, in war movies where they like had their little sticks and they've got like a map and they're like pushing the little things around with the sticks because they're like determining strategy. That's what we're doing. Like, I want to take the problem, I want to lay it down on the table. I want to look at all the pawns. I want to move things around, and I want to see it outside of me, because it is a problem like outside of you. It has to be something, it's not something that you're dealing with internally. This is why I'm a big proponent of like talking out loud, asking yourselves questions. A lot of times when we're upset about something or we're curious about something, this is why people tell you to journal. Like, just get it out of your mind, because your mind is not an environment like that is super conducive to making calm, quiet, rational decisions. It just bangs around in there. But if you get it out, like, you know, talk to the mirror, journal, just say out loud, like, you know, what do I do if X, Y, and Z? Should I blank, blank, blank? Have a conversation with yourself to get it out of your mind and really take a look at, okay, like, what is everything that we're looking at here? And then it will be much clearer on which decision feels better to you, which decision has the most benefits, you know, depending on the circumstances, like, which it'll be much clearer to listen to your gut. Like, if you're like tumbling things in your mind and somebody's like, well, just listen to your gut. That is the worst. Like, that's a horrible, that doesn't help. Like, you're like, I don't know where my gut is. I don't know who's yelling in my head right now. So unfortunately, sir, madam, I am unable to listen to a gut that I cannot find. You'll have a much easier time listening to your gut when the clutter is out of your mind. Third and final rule, you make the decision and then you move on. Any pain from making a decision, like after you've already made it, comes from turning around. Like, what ifs never help you. Never help you. Nowhere in life is what if going to help you. You have to just, and this comes from like self-confidence and self-trust. You have to make that decision and forget about everything else. Like, think about it as a path. You're walking down the path and that door behind you has closed. Like, it is, you know, things may go wrong. You might have to figure things out like later, but that's not happening right now. Right now, you are just walking straight ahead, and that is it. Deliberating and like it's debilitating when you have made a decision but you kind of haven't, you know what I mean, where you're like, oh, I want to do this, but then you kind of look around and you look back and hope that something like strikes you in the head to tell you that you did the right thing and that's the right decision. That's not helpful. You make it, you do be definitive about it, and then you don't look back. Okay, so now we've gone over the rules, we've gone over the non-negotiables. Now, here are some helpful tips for when you are actually making those decisions. And I bet you haven't heard these before. I looked at these, I was like, this is something that I've never heard anybody talk about. This is something that I've only learned out of personal experience. So I'm going to share it with you. So hopefully when you're facing larger decisions, you're not going to have to go through as much practice as I did to get better at them. So a couple things. One, imagine, and some people are going to disagree with me on this, but hear me out. Imagine the worst case scenario. You're like, what the hell? No. And then make a plan to get out of it. Imagining the worst case scenario is not helpful if you don't actually take a look at like, okay, what are we going to do if that happens? Worst case scenario is helpful when you say, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then how are we going to get out of it? If you're going into something thinking, okay, if everything goes to shit, if everything crashes and burns, what's our plan? If you have a plan for the worst case scenario, then you're fine. Like you know what you're going to do. This really reminded me of when I heard this from somewhere and I can't remember. I think I was talking to a friend or something, but when they were saying that when they have anxiety, like they have a game plan when they are worried or any type of those things, or if they get overwhelmed, they have like a list on their phone of the things that they do. So if they get overwhelmed and feel like things are like crashing around them, they go, I don't know, like get a glass of water, they go take a nap, and they take the afternoon off. If they have anxiety, what they do is they go take a walk, they meditate, and they take the afternoon off. I don't know. But they have basically this prescription for themselves of, if this happens, this is how we deal with it, which was genius, first of all. So take that piece of advice, but then that can be applied to, okay, like, hey, if worst case scenario. So like when I was determining colleges, I was like, okay, worst case scenario, I get there and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Well, okay, I'm the unhappiest I've ever been. I hate it. Let's throw in some curveballs. I'm doing terribly in my classes. Everything's going poorly. Okay, well, what do? Oh, you leave. I was like, okay, if I hate it, like I just transfer. Like I go to a different school. People do that all the time. When I was first deciding to go to my first job at the pharmaceutical company, when I was like, what do I do if I hate it? Oh well, I leave. And that, easier said than done. It took me several months to do that. So obviously it's not as straightforward, but going into these knowing that you have a plan for if your greatest fears manifest themselves makes you feel a whole lot better and more secure in your decision. Next tip, that's actually been really interesting and very helpful. It has to do with the worst case scenario, but it's, you tell the story of the worst case scenario as if it already happened. So let's take the college example because that's the easiest. So if I was determining, okay, what am I going to do? Which college am I going to go to? And I say, okay, worst case scenario, I go to a college. And at this point it was me say, okay, worst case scenario, I go to Columbia College. I was like, okay, let's tell this story as if it already happened. So I'm talking to somebody and I'm like, yeah, I went to college and I got there and I hated it. My grades were just trash. And so I ended up leaving, took some time. I went home, and then the next semester I started at a different college and it was a lot better. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. If say, okay, worst case scenario for me, leaving TJ Maxx and starting a business on myself or by myself. Yeah, well, I've done this one a couple times. Yeah, I started a business and it was super fun. It was super stressful and the market just wasn't that great. And I just stopped getting clients. It was getting very hard to get clients. I got super burnt out and I wasn't making enough money to sustain. And so I went and I got a job. I got a job as a bartender and I've been working there, and we'll see what happens next. Maybe I'll go work in marketing. Maybe I won't. Maybe, I'll stay here. I'm pretty happy here, but we'll just see what happens. Well, shit. Because I've had moments where I'm like, okay, there's a total fear. And if you've owned your own business or you've been in this place, like, there is an impending doom that you kind of have to get over, that everything is going to fall from under you. So I'm like, okay, if everything falls from under me, like, what am I going to do? My little game plan is that my first move is going to be a bartender, because I feel like I would be really good at it. And it sounds quite fun. But when I am so scared, I'm so anxious, and I'm like, oh my God, what if everything falls from under me? Well, then when I tell myself that story as if like everything did fall from under me, and then I did X, Y, and Z, I'm like, that doesn't sound so bad. It's using like hindsight is 2020, or like when you get through experiences, it's not so bad. It's using that without you actually having to experience that. Think about like any time in your life, like right now, where you're like, oh yeah, I thought that was going to be bad, but it was not as bad as I thought. You're using that sort of method without actually having to go through the crap to get to the other side. That makes you feel a lot better when making these decisions. It's similar to the worst case scenario. It's just sort of settling that anxiety for the what if moments. All right. Next one. I was supposed to write 3. I definitely wrote 4. So anyway, number 3, if you're in this moment and you are facing your big decision and you're freaking out, this is a very practical tip. Like, take the biggest breath that you possibly can. The biggest inhale. I want you to see if you can inhale all of the air from the room. Then you hold it. Count to 10, whatever you need to, don't pass out. And then you completely let it go. Let it go until you have literally no air within your lungs. Let it go until you cannot blow out anymore. You do that until everything kind of settles down and you can approach it with a clear mind. That is one method that, like, if I'm in a spinning like spiral thing, a lot of times, like, I will result to going to TikTok to like quiet my mind because I'm trying to distract it with something else. In that moment, I know, like, I need to take the biggest breath that I can. I need to hold it. I need to let it out and let everything that is cluttering my brain out with that exhale. Like, you have to let it go. That's like a pretty short and simple tip that's been super helpful for me when I need to quiet everything down. Just the literal biggest breath. And one thing, it takes your focus off of everything because you're focused on one, inhaling everything and then exhaling everything and not passing out. And then just getting that oxygen in, and that, I don't know what it is with breath work. I'm sure there's experts that can talk about it, but it just quiets your mind. And that is the position that you want to be in when you're making these decisions. And the last thing, you've got to realize that the pain, that terrible knot in your stomach, it's gonna be gone once you make the decision. Like, it's gonna be gone once you say, okay, this is what I'm gonna do, and you move forward. Most of that anxiety and that like crappy feeling is from just having to make the decision. It's not about the consequence. It's just that getting over the hill of making the decision and then moving on. That's the hardest thing. You know what I mean? If you can get over that, you're golden. Was that helpful? Did that ease something in your mind? Did that help you at all? I hope if you are currently facing a big decision that you are doing so trusting yourself, you're doing so with a clear mind. What did Joseph said something yesterday? And he was like, I think we need to approach this with a clear mind and open hearts. And I was like, what the fuck did you just say? Anyway, but yes, I hope you're approaching these decisions with a clear mind and open heart. And I hope that these tips and these non-negotiables, take them with you, steal them. This is exactly why I make this podcast. So I can tell you these things and you can take them to make your life just a little bit easier. I hope they make these decisions a little bit easier. And I hope that you are able to learn from my experiences, because that's the whole point. If you can learn from somebody else, you don't have to make their mistakes. You don't have to feel the uneasy feelings that I did, and I don't want you to. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I'm so happy to be back doing some solo episodes. If you have any topics or anything that you want us to discuss, please send a DM to @Attainable Podcast on Instagram. I adore seeing your messages, and they just mean the world to me. If you could take a moment, if you're on an iPhone, if you're listening on Apple Podcast, if you could go and leave, rate the podcast and then leave a review, that helps us grow so much. It means so much to us. And it would just mean the world to me if you would go just leave a little review, just a quick one. It's just, you don't know how far it goes in promoting the podcast. And the more that we promote the podcast, the more content that we can make. So I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you listening. I love you so very much. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.